So I'm very happy to be here tonight with Mark Binet. I believe it's pronounced Binet, is that right?
Yes, sir, it is. Thank you.
Who's joining me from Ohio, USA.
That's correct.
And we've had a bit of contact back and forth over the last couple of years. And I first came across Mark on Facebook. And the thing I immediately resonated with in his writings was that he was very spiritually, politically incorrect, like myself. And I'm sure we've both received a fair amount of flack on Facebook for being that way. But then it was the content really of what he was posting about, which was all on the theme of masculine and feminine relationships and this matter of polarity. And what I always enjoyed about your posts, Mark, and still do, is they're just very, no holds barred,
That's right. No punches pulled.
Yeah, pull no punches, stick it to them. And but at the same time, even though you're by nature, you're quite provocative in that way, I always find myself when I read what you've written, it's like, yeah, man, he's got a point, So there's he's not just trying to ruffle people's feathers, he's actually trying to penetrate through a lot of the particularly postmodern conditions. So yeah, like I was remembering, I've shared some of your posts with my men's collective. So as you know, I've been leading and guiding a men's collective over the course of about 12, 13 years now, as part of the Awakened Life Project. And yeah, actually at our last meeting a couple of weeks ago, I actually got on. We had a break, so we usually meet once a month, have a morning session, then have a break and come back in the afternoon. And during the break, I'm checking my Facebook, and Mark's just posted this article, something like, "How guys, we need to lead women to wear a dress." It was basically putting out a challenge to mankind to get women to wear dresses again. And I read this out to all the guys, and they just loved it. A lot of laughter, but also we all were like, yeah, we all love to see women in a dress, and it's relatively rare, yeah. especially amongst more progressive women.
Right.
And then it's funny, after that I was reflecting on the fact that I lived in a spiritual community, quite a very sort of progressive, integral, so to speak, spiritual community for 13 years. And I realized that none of the women ever wore a dress.
Really?
Yeah. Or maybe.
Really? Where was this community, Peter?
It was Enlighten Next.
Enlighten Next with Andrew Cohen.
Yeah. And maybe on the occasional celebratory event,
Okay. I didn't know you were involved in that.
Yeah. It was quite an adventure, I can tell you. But that could be a whole other conversation.
I don't know if you know, I worked with Ken Wilver for a few years.
I'd like to speak about that also.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
But what I put that down to was, not only was Andrew Cohen, he's a very masculine man, but yeah, obviously it was mostly very postmodern women, and I think, and one of my major critique actually of that whole experiment, and also of Andrew's let's say manifestation as a human being and a teacher, was that it was too rigidly, you could say, masculine or mind-based, And so, I mean, that's a simplistic way of putting it, but so many of the women were trying to, you know, shape themselves to be able to flourish in this context where it was very much masculine, let's say, strengths and values were valued, you know, and so what you didn't see a lot of what we could call the feminine radiance, you know, this natural radiance that I know you're very passionate about also.
I am.
But it was quite something to realize that I was just like, yeah, so even this apparently innocuous thing of whether women wear a dress or not, you know, it does point to something, you know, quite.
And it really matters. It really matters.
But I think, there was this hyper masculinization, but in light of also what we're both passionate about now, and particularly yourself, in terms of a positive masculine polarity, I can look back and also appreciate that I got an immense amount of very positive, you could say, character building training, you know, and obviously it was in a context of spiritual awakening, but, you know, I was your typical spiritually interested kind of, I wouldn't say new age sensitive, nice guy, you know, but I was, you know, I was definitely that kind of spiritually interested, kind of sensitive guy, you know, and, you know, it was quite a big part of a big step in my evolution was when I actually joined that community and we began to have men's groups, you know, meet. And you know, and as I said, I was part of that experiment for 13 years. It was a agony and ecstasy. It was I wouldn't change anything at all about it. I feel like light and shadow, it was an incredible learning experience, and the light was just as important as the shadow was just as important as the light in terms of the learning experience. Mm-hmm. But when I left that experiment, and then a few years later, and you know, I never thought this would ever happen. I thought I'd had enough of spiritual community, you know, after 30 you know, during that time, it was very full on. I never had my own room, you know, just sleeping with a bunch of guys in different configurations, and full on, a very, very, very committed life of meditation, service, practice, you know. But then, you know, sure enough, a few years later, this seed started to ignite between myself and my partner at the time, and she'd also been involved in that experiment. And that seed brought us to Portugal. We bought an abandoned farm, and what we now call the Awakened Life Project started to develop.
Okay.
And after a few years, you know, this was when people were starting to come, and we were having volunteers, and people were attracted to our vision and sticking around, whether at the place or just in the web of relationship. And I realized I was really missing something that a beautiful way to describe it is I just recently did an interview with Jed Diamond. I don't know if you've heard of him. And he's actually been involved in men's work since 1969.
Okay. What's his name?
Jed Diamond.
Jed Diamond. I'll look into him.
We had a very interesting dialogue. I can send you the interview. And he brought up this quote by Robert Bly, I think it is, and it's the sound that male cells sing.
I love that. What is it?
When I heard it, I was like, yeah, that totally captures something that I was missing, and then that inspired me to begin this men's collective, was that there's something that happens when men come together.
Yes.
That can't happen, you know, even if you had 50 men in the room and there's one woman in the circle, it's not going to happen. You know? Mm-hmm. And so this is, you know, this has been a passion of mine, and this men's collective now, the reason I felt inspired now, and many of us have, to create a documentary about our work and learning, callings, which we're calling a new men's liberation. And the reason we're wanting to step out in a bigger way and just share our work and also connect with other people and groups like yourself is it's just amazing. You know, I could never have imagined. I mean, it's way, way beyond what I experienced in Enlighten Next.
Really?
Yeah, really, really. Because I feel it's that strong, strong spine, you know, raw masculine that we're inhabiting more and more as a individually and collective. But it's but it's combined with this wide open, ragged heart, you know, and this deepening capacity for us as men to feel, to love, you know, to be to live our life.
I want to ask you a question, if you could help me understand, what is the major difference you think between the hypermasculine ethos that you experienced at Fox Hollow and what you're doing now? How is the frequency of masculinity different? I have an idea, but I'd like to hear what you think.
I'll tell you, I'll give it my best shot. In the Enlighten Next community experiment, there was a great emphasis on the spiritual context as it pertains to the human condition, and being the emphasis being that everything that we are and everything that we could experience is fundamentally impersonal.
Yes.
There's nothing personal about it, right? So who we most fundamentally are is consciousness, is spirit, you know, and obviously in that deepest dimension that transcends gender even. And but then so there was a lot of, at its best, you know, at its best, there was a lot of profound eros, you know, this surging eros that went way beyond the personal, you know. So we experienced some extraordinary episodes and explosions of collective awakened consciousness, you know, in which all of us, all the men involved, we all became these kind of transparent vessels for this, what we called at the time a new being. And then, of course, when that would happen, the fullness of our individuality would also come online, you know. There'd be this intersection. But and so there was a lot of clarity, there was a lot of what I now call Shiva energy, and by Shiva I mean that impersonal masculine force of just consciousness itself. But there was, when I look back now, there was a lack of heartfulness. There was a lack of full embodiment of love, or more the Shakti principle, which we could also describe the feminine, you know. But when I say feminine in this case, and I'm sure you appreciate, it's not necessarily tied to gender. And so going into the personal, as it was often called in Enlighten Next, was taboo, you see. Basically, you know, we were all, the injunction was more or less that we should all be dealing with our own personal, you know, issues and wounding and whatever issues, you know, through applying the teachings. And then, but then when we came together, what it was about going beyond that, you know. And so I think we, you know, the strength of that experiment was that we did, you know, we did go beyond that, and in quite extraordinary ways at the best of times, and in ways that definitely radically transformed my understanding, my being, and my appreciation of what's possible. But it didn't. It was not grounded in a, you could say, a deep humanity, you know, a deep, raw, ragged humanity, which would allow for all of that messiness, you know, of, quote, the personal, to be felt through you know, not in a therapeutic context, because you see Andrew in Enlightened Next was very much pushing off against the whole therapeutic postmodern ethos, you know, but it was in reaction to that.
Yeah.
So then there was a kind of cutting off of, yeah, but
Peter, would you say that the impersonal was one of his ways of heading off that psychotherapeutic as well?
Yeah. And it was kind of it meant that the more, let's say, the Shiva consciousness, this radical energy of spiritual awakening, couldn't actually trickle down, you know, and interpenetrate and you know, I mean, it's not to say that wasn't there. There was a lot of facing all kinds of shit, you know. But if I just compare it to my work now and how different it is in the men's collective now, there was just there was a lot that wasn't allowed, you know, or was presumed to be off limits or taboo. And I found just through being willing to explore and experiment and just bring anything and everything online, that yeah, for example, we had a retreat last year. We had this meeting that went on all night long, right? We were all around a fire all night long. And during that meeting, we kind of went from heights of collective, what I call a collective emergence, you know, just profound, searing recognition that we are just this one being, this one consciousness. And then, you know, there's a guy, one of the brothers sitting next to me, and something comes up, you know, in the inquiry. It really hits him. And I just realized it's your mother. You've still got your mother on your back, you know. Obviously, there was a bit of a preamble to this that made me know that's what was going on.
Yeah.
And I said, look, man, you got to get her off your back. You got to get in touch with your anger, you know, because he was, you know, he was really messed around and manipulated by his mother. So I say to Alex, who's a therapist in the group, I say, take him over there and deal with him. Get him to get in touch with his anger. Mm-hmm. They go off, you know, just outside the circle, and we're carrying on, you know, with this more impersonal kind of inquiry and emergence. And meanwhile, he's kicking and screaming over there behind us, getting in touch with his anger. And then, you know, when he's done and he comes back to the circle, and I was like, right, you know, and he's bang, okay. So that's just symbolic to me. I remember that night, and afterwards I was like, wow, you know, it's just so amazing to be in a field together, to be in an intelligence together, which is so flexible, you could say, that you can encompass, you know, but you could say both ends of the spectrum. You know, we're really diving into some shadow and, you know, needing to do some deep trauma work and some catharsis, you know, but not, you know, but then for that to be done in the context of something that far transcends, you know, your shit show as an individual.
So Peter, what is the name of the movement again that you've started?
It's called the Awaken Life Project. And I call it the Men's Collective.
The Men's Collective. So do you have a vision for what you want men to be?
Well, that's an interesting question. I'm
glad you like it.
Well, first of all, I can't really separate myself out from this whole process. So I'm in this kind of interesting position. I mean, obviously I'm the leader and the teacher, but I'm also a brother to all these men, a deep brother.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, that's something I'm also in a positive way very proud of, because I'm sure, as you're aware, one of the ways that traditional and postmodern spiritual experiments fall down is around this whole guru issue, you know. And so often, as was the case with Andrew, they either put themselves on a pedestal, or because they're not down in the trenches with their students fully, you know, they while their teachings might be catalyzing something very positive, they don't actually become a part of it, you know. So Andrew, for example, Andrew Cohen, my former teacher, he never was in the circle with us. He was never in the men's meeting with us, you know.
Why is that?
Well, because he set himself apart, you know. And that to me,
is more awakened or superior in some way.
well, yeah, inherently that was implied, but to me that's simply put, you know, there's other dimensions to it, but the reason that Enlightened Next collapsed and his whole teaching career collapsed was because he wasn't willing to sit in a circle with his senior men at that time, and, you know, be an equal, you know, but not in the sense of his you know, a flatlined, you know, you know, anti-hierarchy, but just look, Andrew, come on, you've also got some issues too to look at, you know, we're in this together. And so that was a big thing I learned from, you see, even though I'd left some years before the collapse. I felt it coming. I just realized that as we were developing as a collective, particularly the men, because obviously I was more involved with the men, something in that kind of more rigid teacher-student hierarchy had to give, you know, if this evolutionary movement was going to continue. And even though he, you know, even though in his own teaching he spoke to the fact that, you know, the function of the teacher or the guru would have to adapt in the light of a more collective emergence of consciousness. You know, he even said at a certain point that the collective consciousness itself could potentially become the guru mind, you know, could be the guiding intelligence itself. But in the end, when it came to him, for him to do that, he didn't want to do it. And so I, you know, I've recognized and experienced myself the value of being a student, you know, having a strong leader. I can also recognize, I'm sure you're a strong leader yourself and you're inspiring your own students in that way. But I also, in this collective, I also recognize, well, look, I'm on fire, I'm inspired, I've got a lot to share, but I'm also a work in progress, you know. You know, there's more I want to develop as a man. I don't really know what that is. So in terms of that, your question, the clear vision, I wouldn't say I had a concrete vision, but just this sense of whatever it means to embody an authentic, integrated manhood. You know, I'd learned some about it. I'd been given a good sort of boot camp initiation, you know, but there was a lot more to go. And so I feel that my own guidance of this collective has been part and parcel of my own evolution also. And that's why I can say I'm both a teacher and a brother to these guys.
Yeah.
And but anyway, let's so segue this to, so you can talk a bit about your work, because I basically watched the interview you did with the interview you sent me.
Yeah, with JC Intellectual Sniper.
And
best name on the internet.
Yeah. So my favorite line in the whole interview was Polarity doesn't give a shit about your PhD in gender studies.
It's one of my favorite lines too. I've used it more than once.
So yeah, so maybe just to dive into that, because partly obviously what's inspiring me for us to create the documentary and me to do a series of interviews like this is, like, you know, mankind, in at least in the Western world, is very fucked up, you know. Put it mildly. and I share your feeling that the sort of postmodern and even the so-called integral mean is profoundly depolarized.
Yeah.
And it's actually my conviction, and it's been my experience, that most people who consider, many people I know anyway, people I've known, who consider themselves to be integral, you know, in other words, transcended and included, postmodern, intellectually they may be, and maybe in terms of their spiritual aspirational vision they may be, but emotionally they're very damn green, you know.
Yeah.
And that's why being spiritually politically incorrect is so triggering.
Yeah, you know, so when I was at Integral Institute,
So tell me about
29.
the crisis of mankind as you see it.
Okay, sure. And I'll weave in some of this discussion of Integral as well. And I think we also connected on Ramana Maharshi as well. Didn't you? Yeah. Okay, so briefly, I'm really concerned about the systemic emasculation of males on planet Earth, in particular Western societies. Emasculation happens in many different ways. One of them is through postmodernism, right? Where, to briefly describe it, truth is relativized into non-existence. Another emasculation can happen through integral, where men get absorbed and obsessed with these cartographies, maps, and they think they've got it all figured out.
Right.
And what's happened is that they're quite disembodied and they don't know it, because the map is always co-opting any evidence to the contrary. So they just can't see what they can't see because the map won't let them see it. Ironically, it's supposed to be the most comprehensive map in existence. So the map can actually blind you based on how you use it.
Right.
Right. And then my way of addressing the systemic emasculation was to create what I would call this post-spiritual masculine path, right? And so I'm going to get a little esoteric here. And
Oh, good. I like esoteric, so that's fine with me.
I know your audience. Hopefully, your audience will resonate.
I'm sure they will. I'm very curious what you mean by post-spiritual.
Yeah. So this is what I mean by it. So we have the evolutionary current, and you can look at bypassing in a constructive way. When the evolutionary current is really, really strong, you positively bypass a lot of things in order to get into the causal and then the non-dual. Okay. And so you go into that formless causal. It's got different names, and I'm going to kind of conflate some names here. You can call it emptiness. You can call it this God. You can call it spirit. And you realize your identity with that. And part of that is what I would frame as a constructive bypass of anything that your consciousness would identify with in the moment. So there's the Sanskrit of neti, 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 not this, not that, not this, not that. And then you find the formless ground, the causal ground. Well, in order to find that formless ground, you had to do not this, not that, because consciousness is going to identify with this and identify with that. So I frame that as a constructive bypass. Important distinction, because bypassing gets such a bad rap. But you kind of have to bypass the entire manifest realm to get to the unmanifest.
Right.
And then that's the summation or peak of the evolutionary journey, is to find that causal ground. But then if you break through even that, then you start the involutionary journey into non-duality. And so, and that's typically framed as a descent. So the evolutionary ascent into awakening, and then the devolutionary or involutionary descent.
Yeah.
What is that?
Right.
Well, the way that I frame it, and I think many others as well, is it's like, if you look at awakening as, you know, the attention energy of the body mind opens in the crown chakra, and you realize your identity with the formless ground. That's kind of like an ascent up the chakra system into, boom, that awakening. But then the involutionary descent is when the attention energy of the body mind starts to re-inhabit
Yeah.
the rest of the chakra system. And it's doing it in this inclusive manner that actually can compensate for the deliberate constructive bypass that happened on the evolutionary ascent.
Yeah.
So you're now re-inhabiting. This is really important because, for example, if you're really caught up in postmodern dissociation and emasculation, like I was discussing, or integral emasculation and dissociation, when you're coming back down, you can start to be more embodied than
Yeah.
you were. Why? Because you're not terrified in the way that you were before. Okay? Part of the reason why we evolve in this evolutionary ascent to find the groundless ground of being, the causal emptiness, the divine, is because of the terror of the contracted heart. Adida talks a lot about that, right? And so then we find the release of that knot, what's called the ahamkara, if I'm remembering correctly in Sanskrit, the causal knot in the heart, that releases in the formless ground. But then if we're not done and we keep evolving and we go into non-duality, then we realize that this emptiness is non-dual with all of manifestation, all of form.
That's right.
And it's a little bit esoteric, but I'm going to get more grounded.
This is right up my alley, man.
I know it is. I know it is. I never talk about this stuff anymore. I haven't talked about this shit in years, so it's great to revisit it. But this is what I'm doing. I just don't talk about it.
Yeah.
I just don't talk about it. And so the awakened individual gets to descend down the chakras again now. And that's the involutionary descent. The greatest challenge I think that spiritual people have after they've had their awakening is when they come down into the heart again, and this heart is now able to just encompass and feel and love everything as one's very being, like one taste, like we are all one kind of stuff, which is real. And that is because the knot in the causal heart has been dissolved. And this is actually more common than people realize. And I think people like Andrew Cohen make it seem like there's like 4 people on the planet have done this. I think it's a lot more common than people realize. Yeah. And it can also happen in a very narrow sense. Like people can have these experiences, but they may not live in this place all the time.
Yeah.
All right. So what I'm saying with the post-spiritual masculine path is that you go below that identification with the heart on that involutionary descent into the third and second and first chakras. And what that means is when you start to go into that third chakra, for example, you're getting back into what? Power.
Right.
And this is what's so important. And this is why power is essential for the post-spiritual masculine path. Now, how does that show up? How does power show up in masculinity? Well, power and masculinity have been vilified by postmodernism and feminism and all that stuff because it's supposedly inherently corrupt. We don't want power in the hands of men. We want power in the hands of women. You know, it's like if power is in the hands of men, they'll be evil. And then, so when you are descending in that involutionary journey and you recoup power, what do you do with it as a man? Okay, remember, you've already gone through the heart and you've got a really great heart. Many men will stop there. Yeah. And that is comparatively emasculated. Why? Because they haven't recouped their power.
Yeah.
Now, when they recoup their power, what next? And this is where, you know, my work comes in, where they learn to lead. and they learn to lead with devotion, because remember, their hearts are already awake. Now, this can still happen. This can still happen with men who are not spiritually awake. Okay, all that really means is that we help them make sure that their hearts are in the right place, they're energetically centered, they're emotionally self-responsible, they're on axis, and then we put them in touch with their power. And that's essentially, I'm working on it from the involutionary side of things, because that was my journey. After I awakened 20 years ago, and I've been living in that energy, in that awakening for 20 years. And I realized that my biggest challenge was that I stopped in the heart, and I didn't want to be the bad guy. I was just like self-emasculating to prove that I'm a good person to women. And then I got all these broken hearts, and I was like, shit, I'm awake. I'm politically awake. I'm spiritually awake. And I keep on getting my ass handed to me. So I had to figure out why. And then I was able to descend involutionarily into that third chakra and find my power again. And of course, a lot of people are like, this guy is insane. He's a patriarchal, oppressive, misogynist, chauvinist, whatever. No,
so how did you do that? How did you recontact that third chakra energy? And by the way, it's fascinating listening to you, because it's also a perfect description, or one way of describing what I'm doing with the men's collective. It's
that's awesome.
It's very much that descent and reintegration, and with an awakening heart as the foundation. So
when you guide and lead men in this way, they don't necessarily have to have gone into the deep causal ground and have non-dual realization and then do the involutionary descent. You can actually teach from that involutionary descent to their evolutionary ascent, and it still works. In fact, it's best that way, I think. So why did that happen? Well, 18 years ago, I knew about, or 20 years ago now, I guess, I knew about David Data and Way of the Superior Man, and I met him a couple times, and I love that. But it took me about 18, 20 years to really embody that stuff, because we were talking about the integral, how they got these great maps, but they're still dissociated because they think they got it all figured out, and they don't. But they can't see that. So when reality hands you your ass on a plate over and over and over and over again, what are you going to do? Like, I kept on making the same mistakes over and over and over again. And I thought I was doing the right thing, which was, I thought that me downplaying anything that would disturb the woman, anything masculine, I thought that was the way to be.
And you thought that's what she wanted.
That's what she wanted, right? So that's not what she wants. She wants the opposite.
Exactly.
And so eventually I figured that out, because there was one thing that I could not solve. Like, you can read whoever you want and have your realizations, your practices, but if your heart keeps getting broken over and over and over again, and you have awakened spiritually and you have a great sense of reality and everything, but that's the one thing you can't figure out, it keeps happening. Well, my answer was, what the fuck's going on here? And so I kept moving into that leading until I got to dominance. And then I'm like, this is it. And of course, that word itself has been so vilified, and it's a pejorative term. But I've redefined it. And it's leadership plus devotion. So in the academy, I train the Academy for Dominant Men and Radiant Women. I coach men how to be dominant, but I'm coaching them how to lead with devotion. So their heart is online. Right. So that this tremendous responsibility of leading a woman, whew, and we bring in judgments, we bring in directives, we bring in leading questions, and we constructively judge women's behavior. But because our inner vision is a polarized devotional relationship, so if she is leading, if she is judging, I will constructively judge that, not because I'm trying to hurt her, not because I'm being a domineering prick, but because my inner vision demands that we have a relationship where she's not judging or leading at all. I'm the one leading and constructively judging. And so then her feminine energy is optimized while my masculine energy is optimized. And so we keep a continuous polarity so that that honeymoon doesn't have to end.
Can I ask you a question about this? It's really interesting.
Yes, please.
About, because you said leading masculine dominance sourced in devotion.
Yes.
And but then another aspect of your work that's interesting and also, edgy, is you're really saying, it's not about, the way for men is not to be vulnerable, or let's say, the common expression, talking about their feelings.
Yes.
Because of course, in postmodern culture, what women think they want, and the message that men are getting is, I'm just thinking of that title of that book by that guy Warren Farrell. It's called
oh yeah, Warren Farrell. I had dinner with him.
Women had dinner with him. Women don't hear what men don't say. He wrote a book called Women Don't Hear What Men Don't Say. And of course, as we know, many men, I think a big taboo, one of the biggest taboos with men is, we're conditioned to like have it all together, and we're supposed to know where we're going and who we are, and even though we don't, and I know in our men's group, consistently when new men join the group, one of the things they say, there's always this incredible relief, like, wow, it's so good to be with men, in outside of a context of just a football match or going down the pub, in the usual men's talk. And so there's a liberation in that, you could say, discovering a forum or a context in which a man can be vulnerable and not have it all together, and even ask for support and have support. But as you say, if that let's call it a need in terms of men's development, is brought into the relationship with a woman, it can be problematic, because, and it's kind of this paradox, because, women, they always say, more progressive women, well, I want a man who, can quote, talk about his feelings, or is more sensitive, or at least is that you have some idea of what's going on in there. But at the same time, as you know, that they want a strong tree,
That's right.
They want someone who's going to love and protect them, and in a positive sense, they want that masculine dominance, even, you could say, even if they're not aware that that's also something. So what's something I've found particularly, that edgy way, you're like, no, men, you don't need to talk about your feelings and explore your vulnerability. You need to lean into this masculine pole. And so, I'd be interested if you could speak a bit more about that and how you see it. Do you see that as having more of a value in a context between men, and not so much in the relationship with men and women, or how do you see?
That's a good question. So what I would say is that, if men really do have to get into their feelings and work through their wounds and their trauma and their pain body, and you're at the campfire and the mother is still a succubus on his back, and he needs to get his anger out with a therapist. I'm not opposed to all that. What I'm leading for men is a kind of polarity where they're so strong in themselves that they don't feel the need to share their feelings with their woman, but their feelings immediately turn into the best leadership of themselves and of her possible.
Mhm.
So I've been with my woman for about 3 years now, and it's been polarized the whole time. It's the first time I've really figured it out. I
Hold
don't
it
think I've,
up.
yeah. Yeah. I don't think I've shared a feeling with her in that
Yeah,
entire time.
that's interesting.
Yeah. And sometimes I will play around and I'll start sharing feelings, but as an act, just for fun.
Yeah.
If she's like been in a masculinized state, I'll be like, oh, okay, you're in your masculine state. Okay, I'm going to be in my feelings right now. And it immediately depolarizes everything. And what we've discovered is that when the woman is really in her feelings, vulnerably expressed without leading and judging, when she's in her wants and her desires and her problems and her needs, vulnerably sharing that, it's tremendously polarizing for the man because he's hardwired to serve those expressions.
Right.
Okay. If he is colonizing the space with that in any given moment, if he's the one sharing his needs, his feelings, his desires, wants, and problems, then that depolarizes her and she goes into the masculine energy in that moment and she holds space for all of his expression of his feelings, needs, desires, wants, and problems. Then they're depolarized in that moment. Now, if they've agreed to that, okay. But for me and for the men in the academy, we're committed to keeping 100% polarity continuously the best that we can all the time.
Mhm.
And that's if you want to do that. Many men may not want to do that. Not all men want to do that. But if I take on that role of vulnerably sharing my feelings, needs, wants, desires, and problems, then my woman is going to go into the masculine holding space of that and it will depolarize.
Right.
Okay. So and I feel just as much as the next guy. I'm full of fucking feelings. You know what I mean? I'm full of them. But what I do is I am really keenly aware of how I can use this rocket fuel of feelings and energy inside of me
Yeah.
for manifesting my purpose, my mission, my truth, and leading my woman with devotion. So it's always transmuted into action and leadership, right? Because if I'm sharing with her, what do I want? Do I want her to solve them for me? No. Solve my problems, or what do I need to do that for?
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I look at it. Just today, I was working with my RV and it was being ridiculous. I mean, it was, and I felt all this like, what? I mean, he's doing something really trivial for 2 hours, Peter. And I was like feeling all the feels about this, feeling it. And I'm like, what is this? What is this? There's this X-Acto blade that got caught in a crevice and I couldn't get it out. And I'm like, I'm spending 2 hours of my life trying to get this damn thing out. Because if something happens, it could really cause some havoc down there. It's an X-Acto blade. And so all the feelings that I was having, Peter, I was like, okay, I got to really look into this. And I realized that it was about this invitation to take myself to the next level of my own truth and mission and purpose on this planet, which is to go out and tour this spiritual art form that I created called the Improva Sutra.
Oh, cool. That's what you're going to do in your RV.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about that in a second. So instead of storming out of the RV, sitting my woman down and sharing my feelings about how like activated and irritated I was for 2 hours, I just was really focused on solving the problem. She could see that, I was really absorbed in that. And I then learned I got greater clarity and resolution on my mission. And I didn't depolarize the relationship by sharing all this energy that was so irritated inside of me. Go ahead. What were you saying?
Well, no, it's really fascinating. So on this whole subject of leading or embodying dominance with devotion, then, in your own experience and with the men in the academy, as a result of not, having that kind of guideline of not sharing, not being feminine with your woman, in the sense of sharing your feelings, problems, all the things you listed, needs.
Yeah. Yep.
Do you find that, because obviously sourced in devotion, there's also even if we wouldn't use the word vulnerability, or a softness, that would be penetrated, because I think one of the critiques that could be made of your approach, if people just looked at it superficially, is it's kind of regressive on some level. It's like, you're familiar with David Davis, his 3-stage kind of model.
Yep.
So second stage, depolarized equality between the sexes. And there's obviously something in common with your approach with what Data's about, but I see and feel you emphasizing a bit more radically this men should be masculine, and so that, that superficially that could be seen as like, well, this is just in the name of being integral. It's kind of it's empowering stage 1 male dominance,
Yeah.
So,
I thought about that.
Yeah, and but that's not how I feel about it. But I could see how that's how some people could write you off,
Right, and it's the devotion actually that differentiates it.
I'm interested in hearing more about the devotion aspect and how you teach men to get in touch with that, and how that is expressed in these non-postmodern depolarizing ways. Yeah.
Well, this is where it's really magical. So when a woman is vulnerably sharing her feelings, wants, desires, needs, problems, without leading and without judging, it feels fucking amazing as a man to receive that. Mm-hmm. That's what the devotion is. Every time we lead a woman into her feelings, or every time she shares them vulnerably, and her needs, wants, desires, problems, what happens is we feel devotion. So but it's not.
I'll ask you something about that. So would you say there's a direct link between that devotion and listening, just actually being pure presence? Because that's something it took me years to learn.
Absolutely.
When a woman is in distress, particularly, as a man, you just want to fix her, well, tell me about it, and to try and make her feel better, and it was a big, it didn't happen just like that, but it's been a big learning in my own process that a woman doesn't want to be fixed. She wants to be heard. And what it takes for us as men to just be a pure, strong presence.
Yeah.
So you're saying that is a devotional posture.
It's also, I would say this, she does not want to be fixed. She does want to be heard. And then ultimately, she wants to be led.
Right.
She wants to experience that dominance. So, you'll talk to women and they'll be like, oh my God, I just want him to be dominant in the bedroom and just ravish me, right? David will talk about that too, David Data. All we're doing, Peter, is taking that dominance out of the bedroom and making it the whole day.
I see, right.
That's what we're doing. And so in order to do that, the man has to be dominant. He has to lead.
Yeah.
But he's not doing it from that first stage of brutishness. He's not a barbarian man.
Right.
His heart is online, but his heart is not the effusive, overflowing love machine of the sensitive new age guy, the conscious male, who's so caught in his heart chakra that he's always just love bombing and everything like that. It's not that.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we want her to be, with her heart overflowing.
Mm-hmm.
So when we lead her into her feelings, needs, problems, wants, desires, I've said this a million times, so that's why it keeps coming up like that. What it does is it activates our devotion.
Yeah.
Because we're hardwired.
Yeah.
Masculine men, masculine instinct is hardwired to serve feminine energy. That's what the devotion is.
Right, I get it.
That's what the devotion is. Now, that devotion could exist 500,000 years ago, but the man is probably more primitive back then, and his heart is not as open. Fast forward 500,000 years, we are now at this point where men have more open hearts, but it's not a heart that's overflowing like the sensitive new age guy who colonizes the space with his effusive loving, which is very feminine. Instead, it's the heart that's very open. She shares her feelings and he feels them. See, if a man's heart is closed down, he cannot feel her feelings.
Right.
But then that her feelings enter him and he's inspired to serve them because his masculine instinct is online. He's not dissociated from his power. Now, he's not dissociated from his instinct. Those are online. So then he can only lead with devotion if she vulnerably shares her feelings, needs, wants, problems, and desires. Vulnerably means without leading, without judging. So when we say, what do we mean by a man leading? It really means that everything that she is informing him. He's receiving all of that information, feelings, needs, problems, wants, desires, and then he integrates, includes that in his vision for where he wants them to go. And in the academy, it's a devoted, polarized relationship. If he doesn't care about his feelings, her feelings, no polarity. Doesn't care about her needs, no polarity. Doesn't care about her wants, desires, problems, no polarity. And if there's no polarity, there's no devotion. So this is all happening on a very visceral, biological, primordial level. Just really energetic.
Yeah, I get it.
In the academy, we're coaching women to be radiant, be vulnerably sharing feelings, needs, wants, desires, problems without leading and blaming or judging. And men, we are teaching them to constructively judge, give directives, do leading questions, and lead.
Do you find, just when I was, because you're working with men and women, do you find it's easier in general for women to inhabit that, what you're calling the feminine radiance, than it is for men to inhabit the positive masculine dominance? Or would you say it's kind of an equal challenge for both?
I'd say it's slightly harder for the women, just generally speaking, but at the same time, we have more women in the academy than men.
Okay.
So women and men, they're on a spectrum. So a man could enter the academy and be very emasculated or have very strong masculine energy. Both of them have the same problem, and that is they don't know how to lead women. So you can have a really masculine guy who has no idea how to lead a woman. And so he gets in a relationship. It's really awesome at first. I call it nature's polarity. And then it just fucking tanks. It takes a nosedive. Why? Because he still doesn't know how to lead. See, here in the year 2022, we have the luxury of men not having to really, men could be in relationships with women without leading them. 500,000 years ago, which is where so many of our instincts come from, thousands and millions of years of evolution. If a man doesn't lead his woman, they die.
Yeah.
Woman can't just be out there doing whatever the fuck she wants. She gets eaten.
Exactly.
Or she's not taking care of the kids. So the man he's got the provision. He's like, this is the plan. This is what we're doing. Boom. But it's even much more natural than that. She knows what she's got to do. You know, she knows she got to take care of the kids. Because he's got to go out and do, we got to bring home the bacon, bring home the mammoth. So now men don't know how to lead, but it's still in their instincts to lead. And that, Peter, is why they feel the disrespect when a woman steps into judgment and leads. Yeah. They can feel it. If if their masculine instinct is online at all, they will feel it.
Yeah.
And I'm writing about that constantly. I'm like, men, there's a reason why you don't like it.
Yeah.
You know, and they're like, I don't know why I don't like it. I'm like, I know why you don't like it.
Yeah. No, that's really good. I can totally relate to that.